Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this time we're going to be discussing some of our favorite audiobooks because June is Audiobook Appreciation Month. As we share these titles, if you'd like to get your hands on any of them, there's several ways to go about doing that. Your first and probably quickest is to contact your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and talk to the staff there, and they'll be more than happy to assist you. The second, if you want a physical version, a hardcover or paperback, is to go onto our online catalog and you can request those yourself there. That web address is on your screen now. You'll see that some of the titles are available through one of our applications that provides digital items. So if you see one that's available through Libby, you can go onto that app and you can download ebooks, audiobooks, and also magazines. If you see a title that's available through Hoopla, you can download ebooks, audiobooks, and also movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing with Hoopla is if you see the lightning bolt, there's never a wait. And that means that you and all of your friends can have the same item checked out at the same time. My name is Jennifer Grinsky, and I am the community librarian for the Dundee area libraries. And our question to kick us off and get us started this week is, what do you listen to when you're not listening to an audiobook? So for me, I'm very boring. And if I'm in the car, I am probably listening to NPR. That's pretty much what plays in the car all the time. Now, if I'm not in the car and I'm just listening to something because I want to, it's probably going to be a podcast. And right now, I seem to have a little obsession with the satanic panic of the 80s and the early 90s. My personal favorite, if you're interested in that, is to do season 6 of Uncover, because they do an excellent job talking specifically about the Martinsville preschool and what happened there. And I could begin talking all about the satanic panic right now, and like Michelle remembers, and like hypnosis regressions that gave people memories of things that never could have happened and could not possibly have happened. And Geraldo Rivera doing a whole television special about things that didn't happen. You know, it's fascinating. I find it fascinating. And I lived through it. I remember going to a school chapel about backmasking on music, and how musicians, if you play their music backwards, have secret messages in there. And it was crazy, you know, and I was in middle school, early high school, maybe, when we did that session. I still remember it and thinking, you know, why would people do this? And now as an adult, I look back and think, probably they didn't mean to. So it's very interesting. The Martinsville story in particular is also heartbreaking to listen to, and the lives that were affected there. And now I've gone on too long. But Uncover, season 6, if you're interested at all in that. So also with us this week is Joyce Tapi, who is a processor at our DAMI administrative building. And what do you listen to when you're not listening to audiobooks, Joyce?
Well, I also listen to a lot of podcasts. I think my favorite one is Mike Rowe's podcast. If you're not familiar with the name, he's the guy that hosted Dirty Jobs. And his podcast started out as similar to Paul Harvey's old The Rest of the Story. He started out with this 10-minute long historical slant with a twist at the end, and it just sort of morphed over time. And now it goes usually for an hour and a half. He usually has a guest on there, and his producer is somebody he went to high school with, who sang with him in a barbershop quartet. So his commercials are actually fun, because he and his friend will actually sing the taglines, or even the terms and conditions of these particular things. But it's so fascinating. He does current events, he does history, he does science. He has all kinds of different types of guests on there, and you never quite know what you're going to listen to when you turn that on. So he's my favorite. I also listen to the Talking Beasts podcast. That's about the Chronicles of Narnia. which is somebody who's reading Reddit stories, and Reddit is probably the closest I'm going to get to actually watching a soap opera, because they're all just weird things, and you never know what you're going to get there. Another one is American Shadows, which is kind of the side of American history you don't hear about, and untold stories, very interesting. And then my own church puts out a podcast, a Bible study called The Gospel for You, that's put up by St. John's Lutheran in Waltz, and so that's a good half-hour Bible study. So that's what I'm usually listening to.
So Joyce is doing a lot of listening.
Yeah, I do.
Thank you, Joyce. Also with us this week is Ashley Lyford, the community librarian for the Frenchtown area libraries. And what are you listening to when you're not listening to an audiobook, Ashley?
So my answer is really easy. Music, specifically Taylor Swift, because I'm obsessed with her. So I just listen to her things over and over again.
Hey, when you know what makes you happy, you stick with it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Ashley. And finally with us this week is Kelly Beister, who is the branch technician at our South Rockwood Library. And what are you listening to when you're not listening to an audiobook, Kelly?
First of all, I want to say really quick, West Memphis 3 is my favorite story from the Satanic Panic. That always gets me. It's very, very fascinating. But when I'm not listening to audiobooks, I'm generally listening to podcasts. And my favorite podcast is called Morbid. And it's true crime and paranormal stories and investigations, and it's actually an aunt and a niece. They're 10 years apart, so they consider themselves more sisters, and so they host it, and I love their banter back and forth. True crime can be pretty intense, but they're pretty lighthearted when it comes to it, but it's just really interesting. They do a lot of research on different situations and cases, so when I'm not listening to audiobooks, it's usually that. And if, I'm caught up on them, which now I'm thinking about going back and listening to all of their shows because I love them so much. I'm usually listening to music, Florence and the Machine, because I'm obsessed with that band. And they just came out with a new album. So
nice. I'm so glad other people listen to music. I feel like I never do. If I'm in the car with Tony, I might. But nowadays, even my 13-year-old is stuck listening to NPR. And I know music makes me happy, but I'm always like, nope, just NPR.
But you know what, when I'm doing tasks like talk radio, like any kind of talking, like whether it's an audiobook or a podcast, just makes me like more focused. It's probably my ADD, but it makes me more focused. I don't know. It makes me more calm too. So I like talk radio.
Yeah. I really want to be a podcast person, but I just can't do it. I've tried and tried and tried, and I just can't. So it's only Taylor for me.
When I'm cleaning, I listen to podcasts and books as well. That helps me a lot. All right. So we're going to start sharing some of our favorite audiobooks. And I'm going to ask Joyce if she would go ahead and kick us off.
Sure. Well, like I mentioned with the podcast, Chronicles of Narnia. I have loved the Chronicles of Narnia since about 3rd grade. And a few years back, I thought, I'm going to listen to the audiobooks. And, well, first of all, I'll tell you what the Chronicle, for the 2 or 3 people out there who might not know. The Chronicles of Narnia is written by C.S. Lewis, and it's about children from our world, specifically England, where he lived, who magically find themselves in a totally different world, the land of Narnia. And whenever they go, they have an adventure, or they have to defeat the witch, because there's more than one. They're always there to try to solve a problem that has been created. And this is a 7-volume set. The first one, and I will fight to the death on this one. The first one is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I know a lot of times the newer sets, they put them out in chronological order, but I always like reading them thank you. I like reading them in the order that they were written. And The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was the first one written. And I have my own reasons, and you don't want to sit here and listen for 10 minutes to my reasons why they should be written. But if you're going to, just read them or listen to them. what I love about the audiobook is, unlike other audiobooks, usually when you pick up an audiobook that's of a series, you get the same narrator for the whole thing. Jim Dale does all the Harry Potters, and Chronicles of Narnia has 7 books, and they have 7 different readers. They're all British actors. So we've got Michael York and Lynn Redgrave, Derek Jacobi, Jeremy Northam, I'm trying to read here, Alex Jennings, Kenneth Branagh, and Sir Patrick Stewart. I know, it just made me so happy. But all these, and it's kind of neat because when you listen to different ways they're reading it, different ways, you got 7 different people doing the voice of Aslan. And I think that's just so different than what we normally get. And I'm always willing to listen to have, willing to have someone sit and read to me the Chronicles of Narnia. So those will always be one of my favorites. The other is also a series of books. It's called the Bloody Jack series. Bloody Jack starts out with the book Bloody Jack. There's 12 volumes altogether, and it's about this orphan girl in the early 1800s in London. After her parents and her sister die of the plague, she's basically thrown into the streets and becomes part of this gang of orphans who beg. And when things get a little too rough, she decides she's going to disguise herself as a boy. She cuts off her hair, puts on boy's clothes, and she is able to get a job as a ship's boy on a ship. And for a few years, she is able to hide her true identity. She calls herself, her real name is Mary, but she calls herself Jack. And it is basically 12 books of adventure after adventure. She gets found out as a girl at the end of the first book, but the adventure continues. And if you like somebody who likes adventure, these are great books. The audiobooks are really awesome. They are read by a lady named Catherine Kellegren, who unfortunately she has since passed away from cancer. But this woman was a genius when it came to her audiobooks. She could convey with her voice fear, happiness, terror. You could hear in her voice what the character was feeling. And because there's so much music, and so many times when the character of Jackie was singing, she would sing the songs, which to me just brings it to life the way nothing else can. And she's fantastic when it comes to accents. She can do a British Cockney, which the main character is. She can do upper class British. She can do American. She can do French. She can do Spanish. Whichever is called for, she is able to pull these accents off. Turns out that she has won a number of Audi awards, which is the award for audiobook narration. She also, let's see, she's in our system has the Enola Holmes mystery, which apparently is Sherlock Holmes' younger sister. She's the narrator for those. She's done Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I'm going to admit right now I've not read those or listened to them. And she does the Kane Chronicles, one of the voices in the Kane Chronicles, which is written by Rick Riordan, who does the Percy Jackson books. Just phenomenally good at what she does. Just brings it to life, and highly recommend the Bloody Jack series.
Excellent. Thank you, Joyce. I have heard about the Bloody Jack series for years. Mm-hmm. And I'm so excited that that entire series is now available on Hoopla as both an ebook and an audiobook. So you can go out there and start downloading those immediately. The same is true for the Chronicles of Narnia. Although I agree with Joyce, for those of you that are Chronicles of Narnia fan, the order on Hoopla is wrong. But you listen to them however you want to listen to them. And the other thing I want to comment on, when I was out there like poking around on Hoopla the other day, Hoopla now has all of the Harry Potter books narrated by Jim Dale on Hoopla. And that has not always been true, because before you needed to go to Libby, and Libby works a little differently, so that if you have it checked out, I can't check it out. As opposed to on Hoopla, everybody can have Harry Potter checked out at any time now. So that's fabulous. I love that.
Awesome.
these kids and tween series are out there and readily available. So yay. Thank you, Joyce. Let's have Ashley share some of her favorite audiobooks next.
Okay, so one of the audiobooks I just finished listening to, it's called Scarlet and Blue. I believe it might not yet be in our system, but it will be very soon. So this is a book that's told from 3 different perspectives. One is, so it's a mother and daughter, and then the mother's therapist. So the mother is a painter, and the daughter is like 15-ish, and they've moved her whole entire life. It's like maybe every 6 months or so, mom says someone is after them. She refuses to give a name because that gives him more power. So all they call him is him. And so every few months, mom sees a black Buick, I believe, somewhere. And she's like, oh gosh, we gotta go. We gotta boogie. So they just get on a train, the first train going anywhere, it doesn't matter where, and they go and start a new life somewhere else. What I find interesting is the way that they pick their new name is before they leave, they like take a box of crayons and throw it at the wall, and like whichever crayon falls is what their new name is. So Blue, that wasn't her name at the beginning of the book, I think was Magenta, Maze, something. And now her new name is Blue. So I thought that was kind of fun and cool. But when we meet the characters, she's done, Scarlet, the mom, is done running. She has some plan. We don't know a lot about her back history. We start to learn about it, but in her mind, somebody did something to her and she has a plan to murder somebody. Okay. Blue does not know of this plan. Again, all she knows is, that there's some guy, him, that's like after them. So the mom has a plan, and this plan takes place in Grand Haven, Michigan, which is super fun because it's, nearby. So they go to Grand Haven, and previously Blue had been on board. She thought that this was always like a fun adventure, changing your name, going to a new town. It's fun, right? Mom made it fun. But she's 15 now, and it's not so fun. She wants friends. She wants to date people. She loves playing the piano. She's actually very, very talented at playing the piano, and she wants to be able to do that. But mom wants them to be kind of quiet and unnoticed wherever they end up because she doesn't want to draw attention. And Blue is such a great pianist that all her teachers, everybody just will remember her. So mom has taken basically everything away from her. Well, in this new town in Grand Haven, mom starts seeing a therapist who is somehow, we don't know at first, related to the story. She really hates him for some reason. We don't know why. Blue convinces mom to let her go to public school, which normally mom has just taught her from home, and it's not your typical homeschool. Again, mom is an artist, a painter, so their school is like focused on paint, different, painters throughout time, different types of painting, making pigment, because she doesn't use like regular pigment. She like actually makes it all from nature. So that's what all her lessons have always been on. So Blue convinces mom to let her go to school. She starts making a friend, maybe even starts dating a boy. And while Blue is starting to live her own life, mom is starting to have some sort of psychological breakdown. So for example, in one spot of the story, mom completely, like just a switch basically. And for 2 weeks, Blue stays home with her because mom thinks she's in New York. She's talking to people, she's going to museums, she's doing all these things as if she really were in New York, but they're in their, little shack in Grand Haven. So something is clearly wrong. We don't know what. One aspect of the story that I haven't yet mentioned is, so the 3 characters tell the story, but sometimes you flash forward to the pianist who is Blue as an adult, and you kind of get a little bit of information about what happened or her feelings of things that happened then. So it's really fun and exciting and kind of twisty turny, and the narrator is great. So I really love that one. The other book I wanted to talk about is called I Must Betray You. And I know I'm going to butcher her last name, so if anybody actually knows how to say it, please chime in. No? Okay. It's by Joyce Tapi, I think. She is a YA author, and she writes a lot of historical fiction, which isn't generally my thing. I don't really like history. But she does it in a very interesting way. This book specifically is set in 1989 in the communist area of I want to say the Ukraine, which is interesting. No, Romania, which is just kind of interesting because of our current timeline. So it's told from a 17-year-old boy's perspective, which is nice to pull in those, male readers. And basically everybody is an informant, right? That's what Christian, the main character, has always been told. Like, you cannot trust anybody. Everybody's an informant. And that was part of the communist regime, was pitting people against each other. So they never really knew what was happening. People believed there were listening devices in the lights and all sorts of stuff. So you were never alone. It was never private. Somebody was always listening. And when the story starts, Christian really hates these informants. He obviously doesn't know whether or not he knows any, but just the idea of it is so awful, obviously. Well, bad news. Christian had a dollar, like an American dollar, so his mom is a cleaner for the American embassy's family. So in that, they have a teenage son, and he gave Christian an American dollar. Somehow the government finds out about it, and suddenly the only way Christian can stay safe is to become an informant. So the story goes on and on. And Christian thinks he's smart. He's got the teenage confidence, cockiness. He thinks he's smart and he can, outsmart the government, the communist regime, at 17 years old. So the story goes, there's a little bit of a love interest between him and a neighbor. And then it's basically it's when the government is being torn apart. So the story is basically told about how this regime falls and who are informants. That's the big thing. Like, you get to the end of the book and you're like, what? That person was an informant too? Like, whoa, mind blown. As I've said previously in these recordings, I never can figure anything out in the books. So I'm always super surprised at the end of things. I'm like, whoa. That's how this one was. So it's just exciting, and you kind of never know what to expect. And I really liked the audio of this because there are some words in Romanian, which I don't read that. So being able to hear them, I thought was really cool. And the narrator also had an accent when he was speaking for the characters. So that was really cool. Just all around a really great audiobook.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm going to ask Kelly to share her audiobooks with us.
So I picked two audiobooks that I love the narrators, and just was an overall good experience. These are also audiobooks that I have read multiple times because of the experience in the narrators. The stories are also good, but the narrators just make it so much better. For those of you who have been following Literary Libations with Librarians, it's no secret that I'm obsessed with Jack Gantos. And the last time I talked about him was about Dead End in Norvell. And so I picked another series that he does, which is also a favorite of mine, the Joey Pigsa series. And the first book in the 5-book series is called Joey Pigsa Swallowed the Key. Joey Pigsa, he's a real character. He's got a lot of stuff going on. He's got a heart, and he's got a mom who loves him. He's got a grandma who's kind of weird and puts him in the refrigerator when he loses control because, he has some wild mood swings, and he's got dud meds, which is what he calls the Ritalin pills that he's supposed to take to even out the crazy mood swings. But, you know, sometimes he makes bad choices and he has to learn the hard way that he shouldn't stick his finger in the pencil sharpener or swallow his house key that's attached to a string that he wears around his neck, or run with scissors. He ends up bouncing around a lot, and eventually he bounces his way into a special ed program, which is the end of the line for him. He doesn't want to fall through the cracks. He doesn't want to keep making bad choices, so he tries really hard to stay on track. Jack Antos does a phenomenal job of taking this character and the seriousness of the things that the character goes through and capturing the humor of it. Because let's be honest, for those of us who have hyperactive kids, I have one of myself, sometimes humor is the only thing that gets you through the day with these children. And so he captures the humor of this and he relates it to kids and helps them, you know, with these disabilities of hyperactivity and other related disabilities. So he captures the intensity, the humor, and the challenges all in one for parents and kids. What I love about this series too is it is actually based loosely on a real situation. Jack Antos had said at one of his conferences that I attended that he was reading or doing like an author visit in his school, and he was in the middle of this book talk and talking real serious, and all of a sudden this kid jumped out of his desk and he was like, I forgot to take my meds, and he went like sprinting down the hallway, and Jack thought that was just hilarious. And so from there, the story of Joey Pigsa kind of formed. And that's another thing I love about Jack Antos. He takes real life situations and then creates a whole, you know, another world or fiction around it. So Joey Pigsa Swallowed the Key is the first book. There's 5 books in the series. I highly recommend them. My favorite thing about the audio though is Jack Antos reads them. And his voice is like a dream. And I love authors that narrate their own stories, because who better to get the idea and into the characters and their voices than the people who created them. So I'm a huge fan of listening to audiobooks that are narrated by the people who created them. And Jack Antos is hands down my favorite. Second, Rob Lowe in his autobiography, because he's dreamy. The second book I picked, I've read twice on audio, and it's called Scowler. It's a young adult fiction book. There are some trigger moments in here, and I will give you a heads up when I go into the summary. But the narrator for this book is Kirby Hayborn. I gotta tell you, super talented. This guy is amazing. This book had to have been so difficult. Actually, I know it was. He read on on a panel at a conference that I went to years ago about doing the voices of the characters in this book. It's crazy. So this book is set in 1981. It's a kind of Donnie Darko type nightmare. It's based, the main character is 19-year-old Rye Burke, and he's slowly recovering and learning to live on a slowly dying Midwestern farm with his sister and mom. Here's the trigger alert. So 9 years before, Rye had discovered that his dad sewed his mother to the bed, like her flesh to the sheets of the bed. And so he attacked his dad with a baseball bat, and his dad got sent to prison. And during this whole entire time of processing this and overcoming this through therapy, he also uses imaginary figures he calls the Unnamed Three. There's a blue teddy named Mr. Furrington, a statuette of Jesus Christ, and a wooden doll with sunken eyes and a metal body he calls Scowler. He finally learns to let them go through multiple therapy and working things out. They're gone. And then all 3 return to Rye in his subconscious and physically while he's at home, when he learns that his father has escaped from prison and threatens Rye's family again. This is all on the eve of a meteor shower with a meteor that lands in their backyard. And then his father is convinced they're going to make tons of money, and the abuse begins again. He relies on these Unnamed Three again to help him make decisions, to help him get through the trauma. It's equal parts supernatural horror and, focuses on those social family themes. It's a very, very dark story. If you like horror and dark, this book's for you. the thing that fascinates me about the audiobook, like I said, the author Kirby Hayborn, Scowler doesn't have any words. He makes like these clicking sounds, and I can't even describe them, but the way that he makes these sounds captures Scowler's personality. Chef's kiss. Like, you're terrified of Scowler. And I don't know how he did it or what kind of things he went into. He said he did a lot of training and he worked with a bunch of different noises with Daniel Cross is who wrote the book. He also wrote Rotters. So, you know, he likes writing those dark books. But to listen to it, it's just, it gets you right there. I mean, the mood is dark anyways, but it, like, his voices that he gives the characters, especially the.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelly.
I don't know where else to go with that dark story.
That's okay. I'll come in with my own dark stories.
Okay, great. I knew you'd follow up with a horror.
You know, let's transition. So my audiobooks, and actually one of them is horror and the other one is historical fiction. And I actually find the historical fiction novel to be the darker of the two stories. Because The Homesman by Glendon Swarthout, we listened to this one for book club, and I went into it looking at the picture thinking, I'm going to get a Western. And that was kind of all I expected. I was like, there'll be some adventures and people will, get a new home out on the frontier and everything's going to be okay. Not what I was expecting at all. There is a movie. I have not watched the movie. I'm not sure I could watch the movie after having listened to the book. It does have Tommy Lee Jones in it, who I feel is amazing, but I'm not sure I could. So it is the 1850s. We are out west on the frontier. Many of these folks who are settling there are very much separated from, they don't have neighbors because they're living on, hundreds of acres. And so to go and see someone would take them more than a day. And honestly, they don't have that sort of time because they are just trying to get this land to be profitable and useful and get enough food for them to eat and make sure they have decent shelter. So 4 of these families go through the winter and the women experience some of the most horrific things that you could imagine. They lose children. They have husbands who are awful. One comes up against wolves when she's alone. And so after experiencing these horrifying, traumatic things, these women can't stay there. They cannot live on the frontier. They cannot continue to be wives and mothers. They are just mentally broken. So when that happens, the pastor in the area looks for someone to be a homesman, someone who is going to take these women back east to their families and their homes back there to hopefully get them someplace to either find help or someplace to live safely for the rest of their lives because they aren't sure that there's anything that they can do for them. So you're dealing with these desolate stories of what happened to each of these women, and Swarthout puts those into the middle of the book. So you'll get one story of one woman, and then you'll get their traveling back east, and then you'll get the story of another woman. So he parcels them out, and every single one of their stories is devastating as a listener. So you have those stories that are happening, and then you have their travels as they try and make it back east. And Mary B. Cuddy, am I getting her name right? I know it's Mary B. But yes, Mary B. Cuddy is chosen to transport these women across the prairie and the frontier and rivers to get them back to their homes. And nobody else wants to help her. So she ends up with a claim jumper who was almost lynched as her only helper. So you have the story of the 4 women, and then you have the adventures as they try and get back home. And then you also have the relationship between Mary Cuddy and George Briggs, who's the claim jumper, going on. And every morning, because here's too much information, I typically listen to my audiobooks both while I'm cleaning and then in the shower every morning. So every morning I turn on the audiobook because I know I'm going to get 15, 20 minutes there. And this is one of those books that I both dreaded turning on to listen to and also needed to know what happened to these characters. So if you are somebody who gets very invested in characters and stories, it's a really amazing book. It has won awards. It is a hard book. If you are somebody who is looking for a fun summer read, don't pick up The Homesman. This book is not for you. So that's my first book. It's very dark, but it's not a horror, except in some of the real horrors that people had to face in the past. So that is The Homesman. My other one is a horror novel. It is Ghost Stories of an Antiquary by M.R. James. M.R. James is kind of known as one of the earliest, most well-known, most well-liked ghost story writers. So Ghost Stories of an Antiquary. I looked this up, one, to make sure I was pronouncing it correctly, and two, to make sure that I knew what an antiquary was. So an antiquary is just an person who really likes old things. So they might be somebody who's really interested in history. Often they collect artifacts from history. They're interested in ancient times. And most of M.R. James's stories tend to focus on the rural area of Britain. Often his main characters are professors or librarians or sometimes pastors. And the start of the stories are always a little slow and seem very normal. And then you start feeling this sense of dread because you know something is going wrong. Also, I forgot to mention, because I think this is a fabulous tradition, apparently in Britain back in the early 1900s, on Christmas Eve, instead of, getting together to eat some delicious food or, maybe open presents or something, on Christmas Eve, they tell ghost stories. I need to start this tradition in my family. So Christmas Eve, we're all coming around so I can scare the socks off of you and then send you to bed, and tomorrow you might get some presents. So there we go. So these were stories they would gather and tell on Christmas Eve. And I'm just going to tell you briefly about a couple of them. I don't want to give too much away. The Mezzotint is about Williams, who is acquiring pictures of buildings for a library in Britain, which, again, sort of a librarian. And he's looking for pictures of different country houses. And so he puts an article in the paper and asks people to send him pictures. And somebody sends him this mezzotint of a particular country house. And Williams is not impressed. He said it's not a very impressive picture, but, they'll add it to the collection if they have to. But he starts showing it to some other people. And one gentleman looks at it and goes, "What is that figure in the picture?" And Williams looks at him and goes, "There isn't a person in the picture. There's no figures in the picture. It's just the house." And the gentleman goes, "No, there's a figure." And so Williams looks at it, and sure enough, there's a little tiny person. And the next time he takes the picture out to show it to somebody else, the person looks a little bit bigger and a little bit closer. And now Williams is starting to wonder, did he just miss it the first time? Well, he gets the picture out a few days later to check it out again, and sure enough, the figure is bigger. And he keeps an eye on this figure, and it's moving towards the house. And at some point, it comes out of the house with a child in its arms. What's the story there? You're going to have to listen to it to find out. I just think all those, none of those things are creepy in and of themselves. Nothing. Person carrying child, person walking, picture, put them all together, ghost story. Thank you. The other one, A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad. Again, these were published in 1904. This one focuses on Parkins, which I just feel is the perfect story for some British gentleman. Hey, Parkins, what you doing? I don't know. I'm going to go over to the east coast of Britain and go golfing. And while I'm golfing, I'm doing the totally normal thing of checking out some archaeological dig sites of where the Knights Templar used to be. Oh, great. Have a good time doing that, Parkins. So Parkins does his thing. He goes out to the archaeological site. And while he's out there, he doesn't look at it real closely, but he finds something. He looks at it later when he gets back to his inn where he's staying, and it's a whistle. And on the whistle is a Latin inscription, which he translates to, "Who is this who is coming?" That's not foreboding at all. I don't know. Who is this who is coming? And you know what you probably shouldn't do with an ancient whistle that you found on a Knights Templar site? You probably shouldn't blow it, Parkins. Don't blow the whistle. What does Parkins do? Of course, I mean, there wouldn't be a story if Parkins didn't go and blow the whistle. Parkins goes and blows the whistle. Nothing seems to happen. But when the maid comes in the next morning, she comments that both beds in his room at the inn look like they've been slept in. Yeah, that's creepy. That's creepy because Parkins doesn't have a roommate. Well, maybe they're just sloppy housekeepers. A little later on, a little boy bumps into him and he asks Parkins where he's staying. And Parkins' like, "Oh, I'm staying at the inn over there. You can see my window from here." And the little boy looks at him and goes, "Oh, did you bring your wife with you?" Parkins' like, "No, I'm not married." "Oh, well, I thought I saw her up there earlier." Yep, that's not creepy. So who knows who's hanging out with Parkins now because he went and blew this whistle. So again, all things that are not creepy in and of themselves, but you put them together, you put them in the hands of M.R. James, who's a master at ghost stories, you get yourself a pretty creepy story. So, and they're fabulous to listen to. I mean, if you like stories around campfires, these are great to listen to. A lovely British man whose name I didn't write down narrates them. So he's wonderful to listen to. So thank you to all of you who listened. We hope that you've got some more podcasts or audiobook titles to add to your list. Thank you to those who shared your audiobooks this week. And we will be back in a few weeks after the 4th of July holiday. Thank you. Bye.